Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio, part of your SB Nation family of podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening across the Big Blue View Radio network, please subscribe there as well. Drop us a rating or a comment if you can. We always appreciate the feedback. And on today's show, as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft, we're trying to bring you guys some different perspectives on the draft and on what your New York Giants might do. And I'm joined today by Nathan Cooper of Sports Info Solutions. Nathan, thank you very, very much for the time today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Ed. Thanks for having me.
So let's start. I'm sure that, most people, most NFL fans, most people who follow the draft, I'm sure that they've heard of Sports Info Solutions, but maybe don't know a whole lot about what you guys do. So why don't you just give me the short version of what you guys do over at SIS?
Yeah, we actually started as a baseball company back in 2002, with Bill James and John DeWan. And then in 2015, 2016, really got into the football side of things, more the analytics side. But the last few years, we've really kind of dove into the scouting side as well. And our website, for the first few years, for anybody that got our draft guide, it was a book, and now it's kind of worked its way into a website, so kind of our own draft site. And the cool thing about this is we've kind of let everybody be their own GM. We write scouting reports, but we'll also go on and put a lot of the metrics and the analytics for the different teams, the players, and all that as well. So every player page that you go to, you're going to get a scouting report, but you're also going to get tons of leaderboard stats and rankings compared to everybody else at that position who's in the draft as well. You're going to get tons of cool stuff on the player pages in terms of the metrics and of the team pages, in terms of the metrics and the analytics from this past season, how they stacked up against the rest of the teams, draft order, the rookie additions they got last year, and then all of their free agent, additions and departures as well. So it's a really cool tool. You can kind of get everything together and kind of make your own informed opinion as well. And one of the cool things as well that we started last year on the site for each of the team pages is the Sonar depth charts, where you can click on any of the positions and get basically a depth chart of who's in there at each position, the total points per game ranking. So it kind of gives you like a heat map of your position. So like, hey, these positions are good. These positions are maybe some positions to look at for the draft.
Absolutely. And that is publicly available these days, correct?
Correct. Yes. This is at nfldraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. So yeah, we're actually adding, more players and more scouting reports every day up to draft week. So we have about 300 players on there right now, and expecting another 50 or 75 to go up over the next couple of weeks.
And you've been there. You've got a scouting background yourself, right? I think various places, including I think the Cleveland Browns for a little while.
Yeah, so I love football growing up. Obviously, played it in high school, played it in college, and then after that, just kind of bounced around trying to get as much experience as possible. Went out and worked with UNLV for a season out there. Worked with a couple arena football teams in some scouting and personnel roles, and then I was with the Browns, kind of doing an external scouting type of thing with them for one of the draft cycles. So coming in with that, obviously, I had a lot more of a scouting background. We come in, to an analytics company and kind of started to mesh a little bit of that together over the last few years.
Nice. It's an excellent tool, folks. If you're not familiar with it, you'll find some information, some data points that might help you make some decisions about who you like and who you don't actually like at some of the positions in the draft. Hey, let's begin to actually talk about the 2023 draft a little bit. And as I'm talking to you, we're recording on Tuesday, and as it happens, ESPN's Mel Kiper's out with his latest mock draft today. And my jaw practically hit the floor as I read this draft, for the simple reason that I see a player drafted to the Giants at 25 who I haven't seen drafted in the first round anywhere yet, forget being drafted to the Giants. And I see a center who the mainstream, the consensus thinking is there's no way that John Michael Schmitz is going to be available at 57. And in Kuiper's mock, he goes to the Giants at 57. The guy that went to the Giants at 25 is DJ Turner, cornerback out of Michigan. And as you just go through Kuiper's 2 rounds, I see player after player in places where the group think, the consensus think, doesn't think they'll be. And I guess my point is the draft is so incredibly unpredictable that is any of that surprising to you, or is it just an indication that as much as we think we know, we probably don't know anything about the draft?
It's a little bit of both. I think that's a lot of it, especially, as we get a little bit closer, so many smoke screens and different things that happen every single year. And, when we get to the draft, there's obviously certain fits that people have had for months that ends up happening. And then there's also these guys that nobody thought, was going to be in the first round. Like you mentioned, with Turner, we could say, Cole Strange last year, not many people had him in the first round. He goes in the first round to the Patriots. And it's not to say that these guys, are bad, and nobody thought that, they're going to, first round material going in leading up to the draft. I think a lot of it's scheme fit. A lot of it's, what's on certain teams' boards, especially, if you're looking at a certain position, maybe above that scheme fit doesn't work. Maybe there's some injuries or character issues that nobody knows about. Little things like that, these guys are diving into for 3, 4, or 5 years into these backgrounds. So maybe there's a little bit of that as well. And honestly, most of the time, if you're taking a guy that hasn't been, in that mainstream, it's just because the mainstream media isn't really high on this guy. Maybe we're higher on the other 5 guys at the position. So it's not surprising. And, every year there's always a couple surprises that we get to the draft that, we weren't expecting for a couple of months leading up to it. So yeah, I could see it either way. A lot of smoke screens happening, but at this time, we're getting closer. It probably makes sense to throw a few surprises in there because it'll probably happen draft night.
Sure. And the one thing that I always try to tell people, we use a big board that Chris Flum and Nick Filato will put together here in the next week or so and post at Big Blue View. And we use a dual access big board, horizontal and vertical. And I think what happens is a lot of fans get attached to these top 100 big boards, top 150 big boards. And as well as I do, that's not how NFL teams do the draft. They may build a big board, but they build it going 2 different ways. They build it in groups, and it just doesn't work that way. They're not going down the list and saying, well, he's player number 1, and we're pick at number 25, and that's player number 25, so that's our guy. That's not how it works.
Correct. Yeah, it's interesting. And for us, we're trying to, set up a draft site thinking of 32 teams. And it's hard to know what 100 or 150 are going to be on every team's draft board because, like you said, every team is going to have their own, draft board of 150 or so players. And if you combined all 32 teams, draft boards, you're talking thousands of different players just because, a lot of those guys at the bottom are probably those priority free agent types that, those scheme fits that, they're probably not draftable, but these are the guys that we want to get in here and, see how they're going to compete in camp. It's interesting, looking from our board to another team's board to another team's board, it's going to be completely different across the board.
Right. And we might see 300 players profiled, at Sports Info Solutions, or right now, Dane Brugler put out his draft guide with more than 400 guys profiled at this point. NFL teams aren't going to go into the draft with 400 guys on their board. No. They're going to know which 150, which 200 guys they think fit what they do, have the character that they want, and go from those guys. So it's interesting. And I guess what I wanted to ask you about, I get questions all the time about Joe Schoen and about the fact that a year ago, you get beyond his first and second picks of Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal. And people say, well, what was he doing? Because most of his picks were not guys that would have been consensus picks at that spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and just let me know what you think of this, I think the answer is twofold. I think, once again, it's an example of NFL teams thinking differently about players than maybe the mainstream media does. And the other part of that is it's difficult for a guy who gets a job at the end of January, is working with front office people he's not familiar with, scouts he's not familiar with. It's difficult to know, whose opinions, whose reports you can trust. And I think what Joe simply did was trust his own scouting instincts and how he saw individual players. Just your thoughts on those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, you kind of have to take a little bit of both. Obviously, when you're coming in, you probably have an idea of the players beforehand. But then also you're coming into a staff, like you said, that you don't know about, but you can't just completely discount everyone, because you have to, gain a rapport with these guys, because you're going to be working with them beyond this year. So even if there's a little bit of turnover here and there, a lot of these guys are probably going to be in there. And, they've been doing the work. Like I said, a lot of these scouts are following these guys for their entire career. As long as they're in those same regions, they're following them the entire career. So they have, these notes and reports on these guys for 3, 4, 5 years. So I think, you have to take a little bit of both. You gotta, a little bit about some guys, like, hey, if this guy's here, later in the draft, I want this guy. But then also, ask your scouts and bring them into the fold a little bit. So I know that, there's some teams that will bring the scouts in to the draft rooms and on draft night, and everyone has a little bit of consensus. Everyone has a little bit of say. And there's other teams that, it's just the GM, the head coach, and, a couple of guys, and then that's it. So it kind of depends on the situation there. But then, obviously if you're starting, you just have a couple months under your belt, obviously take the guys that you want to take, but then also, hear it out from everyone else, because these are guys you're going to be working with for a while.
Absolutely. Hey, let's talk a little bit about some of the positions of interest to the Giants, some of the players of interest to the Giants. And I actually want to start at the center position. In Kuiper's mock on Tuesday, he had John Michael Schmitz going to the Giants at 57. A lot of the consensus of opinion these days is that Schmitz might go to the Giants at 25. And yet there's an argument, is Schmitz the best center? Is Joe Tippmann the best center in the draft? Where I want to start with you is looking at the analytics, looking at the value. Is center even what you would consider a value position late in the first round, a position that really a team should be looking at, or is it better at center, to wait and pick what you might consider to be a higher priority position at that point?
I think it depends on the needs and the best player available, obviously, whenever you're getting to that point. But you look over the last couple of years, Tyler Linderbaum, Creed Humphrey, these guys, I think everyone overthought it. And, these guys were, especially Humphrey. Humphrey goes in the middle of the second round. This guy's a first round guy. Like, if you really think that he's that good, don't worry about, the arm length. Don't worry about, some of this other stuff. If the guy can play, he's going to be able to play. And obviously with these two guys, we've really noticed that the last couple of years, these guys have dominated and are worth maybe that middle to late first round selection. So obviously, no, it's not the value pick. It's not the corner, the edge, the quarterback type of position. But whenever you're talking late in the first round, especially for the top center, if we have a couple of centers that are really good in the draft, I think you go with it. If that's definite need, and that's, some of the guys that are in that best player available position, because John Michael Schmitz and Tippmann, those are our top two centers on our board. And Schmitz, we have ranked at 14. So he's pretty high up there. He's a heck of a player. Now, does that mean he should go in the top half of the first round? No, but 25, I think, makes a little bit more sense.
I was going to ask you just for your thoughts on Schmitz and Tillman in general. I know you have Schmitz ranked at 14, as you said. I'm scrolling right now. Where do you guys have Tillman ranked? Ranked where?
We have him at 35 overall.
35. Yeah, just give me thoughts on those two guys and how you might project their NFL futures.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Big Ten, they churn out offensive linemen just about every year. So two Big Ten centers here. Schmitz, when you watch Minnesota's offense, it's very, there's a lot of, consistency with it. You're obviously looking at a lot of RPOs, a lot of heavy runs. They'll line up 7-8 guys on the line, getting 4-point stances and just, basically grind out a few yards here and there. Not many teams do that outside of, your service academies and stuff. So Schmitz, super strong guy, sturdy base, has the size and the strength that you're looking for there. At 6'4", 300 pounds. So one of those guys that, he's very technically sound, very solid in terms of what he brings. So he's a guy that I think, you bring him in and you plug him in. Obviously, just like any rookie, he may have a little bit of a learning curve, but I think for his, it's pretty minimal there. So I think a guy like that is just, it's hard to come by a guy that, is technically sound, super strong. Because the last few years we've been talking, like I mentioned with Humphrey and Linderbaum, we're talking about some of these smaller type of centers too. So these guys that may be a little bit shorter, not as stout as some of these, whereas, a guy like, Schmitz, he's, one of those big bulky guys that really is going to hold well in the middle of the offensive line. And Tillman, another guy that, feel really good about, and he's even bigger. You're looking 6'6", 313 pounds with him. The hand use obviously is really important with the centers, getting that snap back and getting them up quick. So you're looking at quick, strong hands with him, very flexible as well. And he moves well for his size. So, obviously some of these bigger guys maybe not move too well. With Tillman, he moves really well and can kind of work, whether it's that zone or gap scheme as well.
All right, let's talk about the wide receiver class a little bit. And I see that you have you have several of these guys. If you go just by vertical ranking, you have a lot of these guys ranked actually above 25. Jordan Addison, Josh Downs. You have Zay Flowers. You have Quentin Johnston. I know you have Jackson Smith and Jigba, but there's a mix of opinion about this wide receiver class. I mean, how do you guys see that class, and how many of these guys you actually think might go in the first round?
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about it the other day. Overall, there's probably not as many when we're looking at the number 3 guys and up. And that's basically, 6-7 grades and up for basically for every position. These are the guys that these could be potential number 1, number 2 receivers. And these are high-end 3-down starter type players. When you get to the 6'4", it's kind of a drop off there because we're also working vertically and horizontally, across the board here. You drop down to a 6'4". These are more of your slot receivers, your number 3 types. Maybe they can play inside and outside, but these are more your number 3 receivers. So, we were talking, and honestly, this may be the year that we have the least amount of 6'4" and up receivers that we've had in 4 or 5 years. A lot of guys that we've been ranking, I think we're close to about 50 receivers on the site right now. And most of these guys are in that 5'9", 5'8" range, which are number 4, number 5 type of back end of the roster receivers who have special teams ability as well. So we don't have many guys who are in that 6'7" and above. We just have 5 guys. Whereas, previously you're looking, maybe we'll have a 7'0", maybe we'll have a 6'9", but Smith and Jigba's our number 1 at 6'8", and then we've got 4 guys at 6'7". So we think these guys are really good. We think these guys by year 2 are going to be, that possibly number 2, maybe work their way into number 1 type receivers. But when you look at this draft, I think maybe you could get 2 or 3 in the first round. I think there's a lot of mock drafts out there that are throwing, basically all 5 of these guys in there. You could also include guys like Jalen Hyatt as well, who we have as our top 6'4". A lot of these guys are going in that back half of the first round, but I think you're discounting the fact that there's a lot of edge rushers in this class. There's a lot of tight ends in this class. If you're bumping some of these guys in, some guys are going to have to bump out. And I think the receiver class makes sense to kind of bump into that second round range. But I mean, Smith and Jigba, I think is probably a lock, even though obviously he barely played last year. I think he's probably a lock in the first. Quentin Johnston's probably a lock. And then you can kind of go any way you want, whether it's Flowers, Downs, Addison, Hyatt. I think one, maybe two can get in there. But I think, unfortunately, the other guys are probably going to slide towards the beginning of the second round.
Well, which makes day two, which makes receivers on day two a value pick.
Absolutely. I think a lot of, we have a few guys, you look at the top 10, maybe the top 12 or so, really solid players, but then you kind of get a drop off and you're seeing everything from maybe 10 to 12 through the back end of the first round. There's not much difference there. So I think, when you get to that second round, this is where a lot of the value is going to be coming the second and third round this year. A lot of the value across the board will probably be on day two.
You're talking about not just about wide receiver, you're talking about the draft in general?
Both, yes. Yeah, I think receiver and the draft in general. I think there's a lot of guys on day two who are really going to come in and make an impact.
Give me, since we're talking mostly wide receiver right now, just give me a couple of the guys, your second round, maybe third round, that you think might be real good value plays for a team like the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe a guy like Cedric Tillman. I like Cedric Tillman coming out of Tennessee. Obviously, it depends. If Hyatt goes in the first round, then that probably bumps up Tillman a little bit, maybe late 2, early 3. If Hyatt doesn't go in the first and he's more of a second round guy, I think that's a solid spot for him. Talking Hyatt first, looking at that Tennessee offense, it kind of brings out the big time traits in some of these guys. Hyatt, I think he was a little bit of a benefit from that offense, but I also don't think they used him the way that they probably should have used him. So he's got the speed, he's got enough size, probably better in the slot, but eventually he's going to be able to work your way, to play outside and inside. I think he's going to be a guy who could work really well in the Giants system. And then Tillman is another guy, if you have Hyatt going a little too early, a guy like Tillman in the third round, 6'3", 213, big body guy, makes tons of contested catches as well. Doesn't have the home run speed and the separation that you like to see. But I think some of it is from Tennessee's offense. He's running curls, a quarter or a third of the time. So I think you get into an NFL offense, you get him running an NFL route tree. I think you're going to see a little bit more of that come out. You look at his 2021 tape, and then obviously what he did in 2022 before he got hurt. This is a solid receiver, and I think he brings that ability that he can work in as a number 3, can play outside, can play inside, and then also eventually develop maybe even into your number 2 receiver as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm really curious to see how the Giants do this, whether they go wide receiver in round 1. I think if you look at what the Giants did in free agency and the way that they're set up, I'm curious if you agree with this. I mean, there are quote unquote obvious areas of where they could improve, but come the first couple rounds of the draft, they could do just about anything. I think they could justify just about anything.
I agree. And I think that's a good position to be in. I think, you're in the position to where you're not stuck selecting 1 or 2 positions, because then if those positions are gone, then you're trying to reach and things like that. Obviously, you want to work need into best player available as well. If you really need a couple positions, obviously if there's guys there, go for it. But I think where some teams kind of get in trouble is just drafting by need every year. And then you kind of get into this routine where, maybe a couple years down the road, you have a couple positions that are lacking. You have these free agents leaving. Whereas I think some of these smarter teams draft the best player available. If he works into your plans in a couple years, great. If not, maybe trade him and kind of work from there. So yeah, I think it's a really good position to have a few different positions across the board that you can go. And yeah, I think what we talked about in terms of the interior offensive line, the receivers, the corners, I think any of those positions would be great if some of those top end guys are there at 25.
Yeah, I'm just curious what you think about this. I get I get comments, I get emails all the time. Don't you think the Giants need this position in round 1 and that position in round 2 and this position in round 3? And they should take a guy at this position in round 4. And I tell people all the time, it doesn't work that way because, a guy you may not, if you want a wide receiver in round 1, maybe there isn't a guy there that you really want. Maybe there's 6 guys at other positions that you like better. That sort of paint by numbers position A in round 1, it just doesn't work that way.
No, and you would love it to, if this guy's there, great, take him. If this guy's there, great, take him. But, as we talked about before, the draft doesn't always shake out that way. And you kind of have to be open to a couple different things. You kind of have to be open to maybe taking that best player, because if the draft doesn't shake out the way that you want it to, now, like you said, maybe there's not, you don't want to take a guy in the first round that maybe is going to be available in the second or third round, just because you're trying to take that position. So, you would love it to work out that way if everything, flows like you want it to, but usually that doesn't happen on draft night.
Right. And I think the other thing, you've been around the NFL long enough to understand that what you think your needs are in April might not be actually what you need in September or October.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you have to, it's one thing whenever you're, whenever you're going through the process of rebuilding and things like that. And even if you're really good teams, obviously you're looking for starters whenever you're drafting in the first round, second round, but you also have to think about the future. You have to think about who are my free agents next year and the year after that? Can I draft a guy now? Maybe he's not going to get a ton of playing time as a rookie, but he's going to start to factor in a couple years down the road. And I think some teams fall into a sense where, like, hey, we need this right now. And then they're kind of stuck, whether, like you said, September comes around or even, a year down the road as well. So you don't want to draft backups. You don't want to draft just special teams guys, early in the draft, but you also have to look at guys and how your team's going to look 2 or 3 years down the road, and not in April, not just in September as well.
Speaking of that, the Giants have an interesting situation with Saquon Barkley. He's on the franchise tag. We don't know if they're ever going to come to a long-term agreement. There seems to be a fairly significant difference of opinion on what his value is. You're sitting there on day 2. You're Joe Shane. You've got your GM hat on. I want you to bang the table for which running back you're drafting on day 2 that you think could be a long-term replacement.
I mean, obviously, Bijan's the top guy. I don't think he gets there on day 2. I don't think he's going to go as high as some of these, teams, or could possibly take him. But I think back half of the first round makes some sense. Jahmyr Gibbs is a solid guy. He probably goes a little bit before where the Giants are going to draft on in the second round. So from there, we're looking at guys like Devon Achane from Texas A&M. He's our number 3 guy. We don't see him. It's a little bit of a drop off from Bijan to Gibbs, and then a little bit of a drop off from Gibbs to Achane. So right now we feel like, he's a solid, runner as of right now. Still has a little bit to develop in terms of the passing game. So we don't have him as that 3-down starter, by year 2, but he has the traits to develop that. Obviously has the speed, has that a natural athleticism and stuff as well, and big time upside. So I think he would be a solid guy. A little bit more, smaller, not, as thick and compact as maybe the next couple of guys you look at, Zach Charbonnet, Roschon Johnson as well. Roschon Johnson probably a little early, but Charbonnet I could definitely see going there. More of the bigger, thicker back, similar to what Saquon is, 6 foot 214 there. Big, strong, has the patience, has the vision. Again, not that 3-down guy by year 2. But has enough traits there that he's going to come in, be a solid runner for you, and then have to develop a little bit of the passing game those first couple of years to eventually work into the starting level player.
All right, let me ask you about one more position before I let you go. The Giants have made it obvious this offseason that they really want to upgrade their run defense, that they really want to upgrade their depth along their defensive line. And, we know who the top couple of guys are at the defensive line, the guys who might be available, around 25 for the Giants. Cansey from Pitt, Brian Bressie. But I'm curious, if you're talking about, rotational guys you can add, later in the draft that can provide some value along the defensive line. Can you give me some names to watch for?
Yeah, one Tuitu Pelotu out of USC, guy that we watched, early in the season and kind of watched throughout the duration of the season and in the pre-draft process as well. Just his versatility. I think the versatility is key with him. A guy that we have, labeled as more of an edge type player. But really, if you want to, you can make him an edge in a 3-4. You can stand him up in a 3-4 as well. You can make him the D end in 4-3. You can reduce him down. He even played a little bit of Mike linebacker. So a guy that's versatile like that and who's going to come in and actually be productive across the entire defensive line. That's a guy I think day 2 to look for would be a great option there. And a guy that I like, he fits more of that 3-4 outside linebacker type mold. But Byron Young out of Tennessee, this guy extremely athletic. Obviously not the size that you're looking for, 6'2", 250. So he's a little undersized, not going to really hold and set the edge as much. But this guy's an energizer bunny. He's extremely athletic, can move around all over parts of the field. But he's gonna work his way to the quarterback, work his way to the ball carrier in the run game. So a guy that, again, he's not going to be able to set the edge as well, but you kind of move him around and let him just use his motor, use his relentlessness, his explosion, his range. He's going to work his way, to the ball carrier, to the quarterback. And a guy that I really liked a lot. So I think those two guys, in terms of what they could possibly bring in terms of the motor, the versatility, a couple of guys across the defensive line there that I think could be huge upgrades. Actually,
one last thing for you. We talk about surprises. We talked about the Kuiper mock a little bit. Throw a surprise name at me early in the draft for the Giants if you've got one.
I mean, I think corner makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't be shocked at a guy, if Porter falls there, or maybe a guy like Emmanuel Forbes, where obviously Forbes, he's not the bigger type guy, maybe kind of that Adoree Jackson type of build, 6'1", but super skinny. But he's got the instincts, the coverage ability. He's got everything that you want and still plays physical, still plays press, and plays strong. So obviously you get to the next level and you see a little bit of growth. You see a little bit of development in his body. I think he's going to work his way into being one of the top corners in this class. And this is a really good class of corners. Right now we have him as our number 4 corner, but I think that could be a guy who, if he doesn't go in the first round, I think there's going to be some teams that are going to be upset about it.
Absolutely. Hey, Nathan, I really appreciate the time. Why don't you let people know where they can find you on social media, where they can follow Sports Information Solutions work and all that stuff before I let you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So our draft site is nfldraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. You could also go to sportsinfosolutions.com, see some of the other articles and work that we do, obviously through the baseball side, football and basketball. We also have a bunch of, career opportunities in terms of, we're hiring for live data analysts across all of the college football stadiums currently. We'll have our fall seasonal position that'll be going up here in the next couple of weeks as well. And then, on Twitter, I'm at ncoopdraft. And then our Sports Info Solutions Twitter account in terms of the football side is football_SIS. So tons of stuff, going up, basically between here and the draft, a lot of good stuff going up. So be on the lookout for it.
All right. Thank you very, very much for the time. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.